Welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. This series explores the design of a creature I have built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The stat block for this creature can be found over on the Monster Monday blog, as well as the Twitter and Discord, all of which are linked below. Maybe it's just from my own observations, but I felt that the number of NPC casters is a little lacking in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Since I have begun branching out into NPCs, I've decided to fix that myself, and am proud to present the Metalhead. The general concept for this character started with the idea of a bard who specialized in metal music, and its classic themes taken to the extreme. It's a simple foundation, and one that's a little bit more humorous than my usual work, but a strong one to work off of, giving me a good starting point. Obviously, the first step from there was figuring out the level of this manic maestro, which involved me scrolling a bit through the non-unique caster NPCs, and finding something of a gap around level 10. Obviously, I'm avoiding assigning any particular ancestry to this. I think goblins are a fantastic fit, a spectacular one, for this type of NPC, but any ancestry should work, depending on what you need for your adventure. As I got into the basics of the Metalhead, I tried to keep with the idea of him being a rock star. Obviously, this lends to an extreme charisma, allowing him to serve as the face and forefront of his group. But while he is designed as a caster, he mainly fights using strength, and will therefore keep that at a high bonus to better use his weapons. His dexterity, intelligence, and wisdom all then hover around a moderate bonus. The Metalhead will make use of them, but they aren't imperative to his design. Then, keeping with the concept of a caster, and one whose body might be a little bit worn down from all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the Metalhead only has a low constitution, which could be played with a little bit story-wise as we get deeper into the design. I actually waffled a little bit on the value for the Metalhead's perception. I think he might be a little hard of hearing, or a little out of his gorge from his lifestyle, but at the same time, as a musician, I could see him having a good perception, specifically when it comes to listening to music. With those ideas in mind, I settled on a moderate bonus for his perception. Now, obviously, the Metalhead might have other senses, such as dark vision, based on whatever ancestry you want to take for him, but I didn't include them in this base design. As an NPC, he has a serious slew of skills, starting with a low acrobatics to perform some stage stunts, then a moderate athletics and society for some proper stage dives and knowing the town he's performing in, a high intimidation, music lore, and occultism as some of his more integral skills, and then an extreme performance so that he can be a consummate performer. But like many performers of this persuasion, his protection isn't always perfect. Case in point, he's only using a moderate armor class. I could see running with a higher value, inspired by the likes of costume bands, but I envision this Metalhead being a bit more sparsely suited. Even so, I was a little worried about making him too squishy, and so I used a moderate pool of hit points as well rather than a low value, as is commonly the case for casters. This is more mechanical than flavorful since he does only have that low constitution, but that is better reflected through his low fortitude save. The man partied just a little too much and his body can't do it like it used to. But on the other hand, he does have a moderate reflex and finally a high will save, which honestly just follows the general design for casters more than anything else. All in all, the Metalhead's defenses are pretty simple, lacking any specialized weaknesses or resistances, and its typical offenses aren't any crazier as we get into them. The Metalhead has only two strikes, his fist for when he wants to get into a bar brawl, and then his axe for a jam sesh. And by axe, I do mean his battle loot. Thank you for this, Paizo. Both of these attacks use only a moderate attack bonus, since the Metalhead is a caster first and foremost, and his damage isn't that much higher. The damage is low or lower depending how you look at it, particularly with the battle loot, but there is a point of order there. I only ever envision the Metalhead wielding his battle loot in two hands, which actually gets his damage value closer to moderate. And always keep in mind that like the fist in the core rulebook, this fist is limited to not just the hands, but all manner of unarmed attacks. Kicks, elbow jabs, even headbutts, which will be coming up shortly. Before we get into all that though, we need to talk spells, since the Metalhead is a spellcaster. Specifically, and unsurprisingly, one based on the Bard. All of his spells use a high DC for his level, as well as a high spell attack roll, though I've seen some suggestions for casters using extreme DC instead. I was hesitant to do so in this case, settling for only that high DC, as there are other aspects of his kit that I think help balance that reasoning out. As a bard, he has Courageous Anthem and Dirge of Doom, some buffing along with some real aggressive playing. As for his actual rank spells of this build, the Metalhead has a heavy focus on sonic spells, such as Haunting Hymn, Biting Words, Concordant Choir, and many more. Other spells fall more into the showmanship concept, Agitate to rile a crowd up, Pyrotechnics to put on a real sparkly show, and Roaring Applause to distract foes while also giving himself a hype man. I don't want to get bogged down in going each and every one of these, they do help form a basic concept of how he plays, but I do want to point out that he comes with Summon Fiend, an inclusion that is not usually on the occult spell list. Instead, this was inspired by the Satanic Panic in the United States back in the 1980s, and the idea that metal and rock musicians were in league with the devil. I might be assuming the intent to use a Metalhead as a villain, but where in the real world it was simply sensationalist worry, in the world of Pathfinder, this concept can be very real. With all that in place, we can start exploring the Metalhead's abilities, though it can be a little difficult when it comes to deciding where to start. Perhaps it is best to simply dive into the mosh pit. To trigger this reaction, the Metalhead needs to put on a performance, either playing a composition cantrip or a spell with the sonic trait, which is why he's loaded with them. Once triggered, this allows him to surround himself with the psychic imprint of a mosh pit. Or, if you want to play it a little darker, maybe it's the spirits of those who have died in the actual mosh pits inspired by the Metalhead's past performances. Either way, this creates a small emanation of difficult terrain that the heroes have to get through to get at the Metalhead, serving simultaneously as sycophants and security for our sonorous superstar. This crowd deals unlimited use area damage at a moderate DC, as is standard for an aura, but a character that manages to critically fail the save is thrown, ejected, from the venue. Now, two things about that. Firstly, a creature only suffers this effect once, largely for balance reasons. This is supposed to offer the Metalhead some protection, not turn him into an unassailable Fortress of Fortissimo. Secondly, if you want to play this a bit nastier, I would have creatures that critically fail their saves fall prone, and on top of that, have prone creatures in the area receive 1 degree of success worse on their save against it as they are trampled. While this gives the Maestros some meathead minions, most bards are part of an ensemble, using their cantrips to bolster their teammates and turn the tide of battle. But in the case where the Metalhead is the last to fall, or has been left on his own following his latest drug-fueled rampage, he has Solo Act. This is a super simple ability that increases the bonus of Courageous Anthem as long as the Metalhead is the only one benefiting from it. This means his 2-hit bonus increases to a high value, and a main factor behind it is creating a reason for the Metalhead to use Courageous Anthem over Dirge of Doom while on his own. Not to say that Dirge of Doom doesn't have its place, there will be instances where it's better to inflict a blanket debuff over a limited offensive buff. This just makes it competitive again. The Metalhead's remaining abilities are all things he consciously activates, and I want to start with Shred. This is a pretty standard area effect that deals limited use area damage at a high DC, which might seem a little unnecessary with all the spells that he already has. However, I wanted to include an ability like this with some persistent bleed based on both just, naming conventions in metal, as well as reference the musical assassins from Kung Fu Hustle, a movie you should absolutely watch if you haven't already. This does also give him something to fall back on to keep from being trivialized by anti-magic parties, like a bunch of reactive strikers. However, the Metalhead does have another way of getting out of such circumstances, and that is Power Slide. This is a flourish befitting this pompous performer that allows the Metalhead to stride, up to half his speed without provoking reactions, and then making a battle loot strike. An important aspect of this is condensing actions for the Metalhead. Most spells require 2 actions to cast, so anything that lets the Metalhead do 2 actions for 1 is unparalleled in its usefulness. And while the Metalhead does have a focus on spellcasting, this can lead into another fun rotation of actions for our Manic Musician. A rotation that is completed with Headbang. This can only be used if the Metalhead has made a successful loot strike this round, and lets him make a follow-up strike, which is why I included the Fist in the first place. If this attack lands, aided by the Agile trait, it forces a Fortitude save at a high DC, but not one made solely by the victim. No, no, no. If Meathead meets Metalhead, our ferocious frontman and his victim both have to attempt this save. Though, being prepared for it, the Metalhead does get 1 degree of success better on his check. I'll acknowledge that the Metalhead isn't entirely meant to mash in melee, but this offers a different way to play him. For example, he could start with a Courageous Anthem and trigger his Mosh Pit. Hyped up by his own battle theme and surrounding toadies, he can then power slide into melee with a caster, or other vulnerable target, and make that loot strike. As long as he hits, he can then go for a headbang, and this is why he wants to go for a caster. Aside from them typically having lower armor classes, they also tend to have lower fortitude saves and are more likely to be stunned. And stunning can cripple casters. If a spell slinger gets even stunned 1, they will have to choose whether they're going to cast a 2-action spell or get out of there in case this panic-producing performer perpetuates the pummeling pit. On the other hand, if the strike from Power Slide misses, the Metalhead can't do headbang, and can either spend his next action to stride out of danger, or switch to a Dirge of Doom to bring down the enemies he may have slid his way into. But with that, Maestro, play me out because we have reached the finale of this creature feature. This metal musician mashes with manic motivation, meeting marauders in a marvelous melee meant to make a masterpiece. The Metalhead is a ton of fun to run as part of a band, or suggested by one of his abilities, in a solo tour. While mostly a caster, he can mix it up in melee, but if he does need to call in security, if somebody's stepping a bit too much onto his stage, he can summon a fiend and add to the battlefield. I forgot to record this initially, so I had to come back, but I also forgot that I am going on vacation again starting next week. I'll be out for 2 weeks again as I visit the other side of the family, and then we'll be back for the remainder of the summer. Please be patient with me, and I hope you all have a great day. This was a blast to work on, maybe a bit more humorous than some of my other creations, but let me know what you think of this and what other sort of creatures or NPCs you'd like to see in a comment. You can check out the blog or Twitter linked below to see other versions of the creatures, as well as some discussions on encounter hooks. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.